Everyone. Good morning, everyone. We are going to learn Le'iloi Nishmas Avram ben Yosef Shlomo. That is my uncle. It says your side today. Okay. So we're Pei Zayin Amud Beis 87b2. Okay. So says the Gemara. The Gemara asks. Remember, we had this discussion about this canal. This canal, which is like the Venice-style canal, it's going through two courtyards, or it's going through two homes, and there's a canal. Now there is, and it's a very narrow canal. Remember, according to this last interpretation, I know we went to the last part of the Gemara a little bit fast. But basically, what we were discussing, the opinion that we were landing with. Again, there was a brisa we had yesterday. There's two ways to interpret it. Either it's referring to the banks of the canal. That was the 3 or 4 tefachim, and then we ultimately the second Zeiri understood that we're not talking about the banks of the canal, but rather the size of the canal. So according to the second opinion, the size of the canal is either 3 or 4 tefachim. It's a very narrow canal, okay? And if it's very narrow, what the brisa is saying is it's not a carmelis, and therefore it's not a problem to go outside my window and start drawing water from the canal because it's not a carmelis. It's just a regular shus yachid. It's for water, and therefore it's going to be permitted. Okay, that was the view. That was the second view of this brisa. But the Gemara asks now, even though it's so narrow that it's not seen as a carmelis itself, v'tzehavi, we're at 87b2, end of the first column. V'tzehavi ki chorei carmelis. It should be like the crevices of a carmelis. Yes.
It's a rishus yachid if it's the canal is, but it's a separate.
It's sorry. Let's say better. It's makom patur. It's not a rishus yachid even because it's so narrow. Sorry, it's a makom patur. Yeah. It's makom patur. It's makom patur, and therefore it should be completely permitted and not a problem, right? So the Gemara is asking now. Fine, granted it's makom patur, but still it should be like the crevices of a carmelis. What that means is as follows. If you recall in Masechah Shabbos, we talked about crevices. Remember that we spoke about a person throwing something in the public. So if there are the way you have bricks, whatever, not bricks, like big stones, and you have like the cement or whatever it is, and oftentimes that have holes. Like think about the kotel, right? So there are crevices over there. How do you treat those crevices? So the Gemara, the Mishnah that told us that when it is adjacent to Rosh Hashanah, so you're walking Rosh Hashanah and there is a crevice in a wall next to you, we consider that to be part of the Rosh Hashanah, right? If there's a wall over here and there's a hole and I place something there, it's still part of the public domain because it opens into the public domain and therefore it's seen as a part of it. So it's called crevices of the public domain. So here too, the Gemara wants to say that there's this big canal and then there's like some, what do they call it? I don't know, whatever, a little bit that comes off of it. There's a word for it. But basically there's a little bit of the canal which starts to, so you have the major part of the canal.
Tributary.
Who?
Tributary.
Yes, tributary. That's the word. Thank you. Yes, it's a tributary, right? So you have very good. So you have the canal itself. Very impressive. I'm sure that comes up in court all the time. So you have the canal itself. And then you have the tributary, you have a little bit going out over here, and here's where the houses are, which we were discussing, right? So it's a very narrow thing. So it's really Mekom Patur, right? Really Mekom Patur. These are your houses with their windows, and it's a tributary. So on the one hand, you say, okay, it's Mekom Patur. But the Gemara is saying, but at the end of the day, it should be no different than when I have a Rishus Harabim, and these crevices over here, they're adjacent to it, and this is called Rishus Harabim. This place is called Rishus Harabim. This too should be called a carmelis because it's kind of like a crevice that is. It's just like a part of, in as much as this inside the stones, which is not, you're not walking there. It's adjacent to it. It's seen as part of the public domain since it opens up into it. So this part of the canal, the tributary, should be considered part of the carmelis. Yes, the Gemara answers 3 answers. Abba Baya bar Abin v'Rav Chanina bar Avin d'Amri Tarvayu. One answer is ein chorin l'carmelis. First of all, this whole notion of crevices as a stringency is true only for biblical domains. Right, Rishus Harabim, right? But Carmelis, which is rabbinic, we don't have that. It's really the whole notion of crevices is really an extension. Really, strictly speaking, the wall, the hole in the kotel, the hole in these walls over here, that's not really the public domain. It's just like since adjacent to it, Chazal treat it like it. But for a Carmelis, which already is rabbinic, we're not going to go so far, and we'll treat it as a separate place. That's answer number 1. Ravashi Amar. I'm sorry, the 2 answers. Rashi Amar Filatim Yeshchon LeCarmelis Hanimila B'Smucha. This is only when it's close by. Hacha b'mufleges. Here is where it's more of a distance, right? In other words, the crevice in the wall, it's right there. It's right there. Over here, here's your carmelis, and all the way over here is the tributary, which we're dealing with like over here. It's not immediate. It's not right there. It's not immediately adjacent. It's adjacent. It's not immediately adjacent, and therefore the whole notion of crevices don't really apply. Yeah?
Whereas in the Shabbos case, it's right there.
Whereas in the Shabbos case, it's right here. I'm in the public domain. It's right above me. It's right over there. Okay. Now the Gemara now goes back to the original brisa. Remember, we had 2 interpretations so far about the brisa. One interpretation said that we are dealing that when it's the machlokes between the Chachamim and Rav Shimon Gamliel was about the first way we interpreted it was talking about the banks of the canal. That was the first way we learned it. Then we learned now we're talking about according to Zeiri, we're talking about the width of the canal. right? Either 3 or 4. And then we're going to see a third answer. Ravina Amar, you go into Avad le nifke apume. What we're talking about is where a person makes outlets at its mouth. So what that means is as follows. Let's say you have, you have your canal that goes through Rosh Hashanah. Sorry, you have your canal which goes through the Chatzar. How are we going to draw this properly? Let's see. Okay, here's your wall. I don't know. Okay, here's the canal. This is going to be like in 2 directions at the same time. I don't know how to draw. Okay, so basically you have your canal passing. This is a wall that's standing up. This is not standing up. I just don't know how to draw. Okay, so imagine you have canal going under a wall. The wall is 10 tefachim tall. Yeah, you with me? Yeah? So basically what you do, I know this is not great drawing. So basically the water is going under it. And so what a person does is they make a wall going down. Okay, so now it's an additional 10 tefachim down into the water. Okay, I know. We're going to do like this. Okay, so basically you have, this is a facing view, not bird's eye view. What's it called? Street view from the whatever. So you have the water going under it, right? And this is the chatzar. So the water is going in. The water is going in. But basically what you need to do, right? The Mishnah said you need to make a wall over here, 10 tefach wall. Okay, not according to Yehuda, according to everyone else, you're doing a 10 tefach wall. Let's say you made a 10 tefach wall, but you didn't make it all the way. You made it with a little gap. So the Chachamim say you're allowed to have up to 3 tefachim for a gap, and Shimon Gamliel says you're allowed to have a 4. This gap over here, right? Is this the 10 tefach wall? It has to be, yes, it's 10 tefachim. It has to be 4 across, and it's only like it's, let's say 2.5, whatever it is. And then there's a gap over here. There's a gap between the 2 walls. At what point is the gap too large that it's seen as like an actual hole and not really a full-fledged wall, right? So the Chachamim's view is it could be up to 3 tefachim. Why? Because 3 tefachim is lavud. And then we have Rav Shimon Gamliel's opinion. If you remember, we've seen this sprinkled throughout Shabbos and Eruvin. Rav Shimon Gamliel holds lavud is up to 4 tefachim, and that's what's going on over here, right? So the Gemara says, let's read it inside. Ravina Amar, Kigon Davli Nifke Apume. We're making outlets at its mouth. In other words, you make a 10 tefach wall, but the wall itself is split. And the Chachamim say, the Chachamim go according to their view, which say lavud is up to 3 tefachim. Rav Shimon Gamliel, according to his reasoning, who says that lavud applies up to a gap of 4 tefachim. Okay, good. That is the fine. So now we have 3 different ways how to read that right. So new Mishnah. Yezustra, Shilamalam and Amayim. If balcony protrudes over a body of water, you can't draw water from it on Shabbos. Okay, so you just have a regular balcony over water. Balcony that is open to your home is considered part of your home. Okay, important. In other words, if you had a freestanding balcony attached to a house, however you get there, I don't know, but that's not considered Rosh Yachid. But if you have a balcony that opens from your house, that's considered Rosh Yachid. Okay, it's part of your house, okay? So, you're not allowed to draw, and the water itself, typical water, regular water, is considered a karmelis. I'm not allowed to draw from my house, my home, from the water beneath it. Unless I make a partition of 10 tefachim high, bein milamala, bein milamata. Okay, in terms of the partition, it could be above or below the balcony. What that means is as follows. Let's say I have this is my balcony, okay? And then I can make either a 10 tefach, and here's my hole, okay? Okay, so I can make a 10 tefach wall over here going upwards, or I can make, let's say over here, I can make a 10 tefach wall going downwards. The water isn't until here. Either way, you're using the same principle of the virtual wall. So whether that's over here, whether you made the 10 tefach wall up, high or low, up or down, it doesn't matter. Both. And once you start making walls, the Chachamim treat it like the walls go down all the way, and therefore whether you make the 10 tefachim going up, 10 tefachim going down, that is going to be fine. Yeah? Okay, says the Mishnah further. Let's say you have 2, we saw this earlier, 2 balconies, one above the other. They both protrude over the water, and they have a Asla Yonah, if a person in the higher balcony makes a partition, okay, and Velo Asla Tachtona, and did not make a partition for the lower one, Shtein Asuros, they both can't use the upper balcony's hole Anshi Arvu until they make an Eruv. So what's happening over here is, let's say you have like some space between 2 people. Okay, you have the water below, and you have a balcony over here. Okay, and this person makes a 10 tefach thing, and then you have a balcony over here. Now this person is able to reach. Okay, just for the sake of doing this, let's make his balcony, his hole over here, so it's nice and easy to reach. Okay, so, here we go. Okay, and this person's able to reach this, right? This is basically the same case as the wall between 2 people, right? This is easily accessible by both this person and this person. If they didn't make an Eruv, then they're both not allowed to use it. Why are they both not allowed to use it? Because the ruling of the Eruv is, even though it's part of this person, it's immediately part of this person's place, but since this person is easily able to use it, until they make an Eruv, it's going to space that is easily or equally or easily accessible by both is going to be forbidden for both of them to use until there's an Eruv over here, right? So basically, no one's allowed to use this thing since this guy is able to throw something over and put it down, and therefore, without making an Eruv, it's basically, since he has like access to this, it's therefore going to be prohibited for them both to use it. Okay?
How's this different than what we were saying in terms of which one is easier?
Yeah, the Gemara brought this up. The Gemara brought this case up as part of the discussion over there. Yeah. Okay, fine.
It's
So,
confusing because sometimes we quote from
ahead and sometimes below.
Yeah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'achol midbarei. Okay, Masnisin Zloge Chananim Nekavia. Our Mishnah is not like Chananim Nekavia. Why? The Tanya, we saw this, Bryson, we saw this earlier, to max your points. Chananim Nekavia Omer, Gizustra Sheish Bar Arba Arba Amos, a balcony which has an area of 4 Tvachim by 4 Tvachim, Chokik Bar Arba Arba, Umimali, all you have to do is make a hole of 4 Tvachim by 4 Tvachim, and then you're allowed to start filling water, right? Our Mishnah just said, you got to make a wall. You got to make a wall going down, you got to make a wall going up. Chananim Nekavia, remember we had that strange case where it's the folding walls, right? Virtually folding walls. Our Mishnah clearly doesn't go like him because it says, no folding walls. You actually got to make walls, right? So our Mishnah clearly is not going like the Tana of Chananim ben Akavia. Okay. Am Rav Yochanan, Mishum Rav Yosef ben Zimra. Rav Yochanan says in the name of Rav Zimra, Yosef ben Zimra, Lo hitr Chananim ben Akavia el b'yama shel Tveria. Chananim ben Akavia only permitted this for a balcony suspended over the Sea of Tveria, which is, again, the Kinneret. Why? And we saw this already earlier. Ho'el v'yeshla oganim v'yaros v'karpefos makifos asa, because it has high banks, cities, and karpefs which surround it. In other words, even though it's a full-fledged, even though it's a Carmelist, since it's surrounded by so many partitions, therefore we treat it as a quasi-Rishus HaYachid, and therefore the amount of we're going to be much more lenient in terms of drawing water from it because it's not a full-fledged Carmelist. Because the fact that, again, at least the times of the Gemara, the Mishnah, Tveria was a very happening like city. It was the Gemara talks often about the fishermen over there. Like it was a very, very busy city, and therefore all the Kinneret was surrounded by the hotels and the buildings and the this and that and high banks, and therefore basically had partitions all around it. So it's already not a full-fledged Karpef because it's really Carmelist, because it's already really surrounded by different walls around it, and therefore we're going to be more lenient and say, and therefore Rav Chanan ben Akavia's whole folding the sides, which already, as we all recognize, is a bit of a stretch. He's doing that only in a place like Tveria by the Kinneret, because the fact that already it's really not so much like a Carmelist. Yeah? And now we're going to say a couple of different things that Rav Chanan ben Akavia said about Tveria. Okay? Really unrelated, but 3 different things. Tana Rabbanan. Shlosha dvarim hitr Rav Chanan ben Akavia l'anshei Tveria. 3 things Rav Chanan ben Akavia permitted for the people of Tveria. What are they? 1, mimalin mayim migezustra b'Shabbos. 1, you're allowed to draw water from a balcony on Shabbos. Okay? V'tomnim ba'atza. You're allowed to storing fruit in the residue of bean plants. Okay, one of the words does that mean? Don't worry, we'll find out. Umistapkin ba'aluntis, and you're allowed to dry yourself with a bath towel on Shabbos. What do those things all mean? The Gemara is going to explain. Number 1, mimalamai migzustra b'Shabbos, you're allowed to draw water from a balcony on Shabbos. Hada amran, that is the leniency that we saw earlier, that he has this idea of these virtual walls. The walls fold down, even though they don't actually fold down. Okay, that we already know. Number 2, v'tomnim ba'atza, you're allowed to store fruit in the residue of bean plants. Mahi, what is this halacha? What is it referring to? So before we see the Bryce, let's just quickly discuss. It's for something to become susceptible to tumah, okay? For something to become susceptible to tumah, which is something we don't think about so often nowadays because we're not really dealing with things becoming contaminated. But for something to become susceptible to tumah, it has to first have had water placed on it. Okay? So in other words, if water was not placed on something, if I have a cup, okay, let's pretend this wasn't a paper cup, so it's Makabel Tumah, it's a metal cup. This metal cup will never be able to come Tameh unless one of the halachic liquids go on it. And not just go on it, but it has to go on it in a deliberate and wanted fashion. This came up a little bit in Masechah Shabbos. If you remember Sham Basil, this bucket that was sitting outside in the rain. Okay, so I have to have water fall on this in a way that the owner wants the water to fall on it. Okay? It could be water, it could be dew, it could be blood, it could be wine, whatever. Whole bunch of different liquids. Fine. But it has to be something falling on it in a way that I want. Once that happens, it's now susceptible to tumah. Before that, it's not susceptible to tumah. Okay? So, with that in mind, so dew is one of those liquids. Now, the problem is, or the challenge is, that dew typically does not fall. I don't put dew on things. Dew happens on its own. But again, the halacha is that, if you remember, v'chiyutan, v'chiyitain, the way it's read and written, is that even if it's placed, even if I'm not the one placing it, but if I want it to happen, if I indicate in some way that I want it to happen, then that would be enough that it's as if I put it on it. Okay, so with that in mind, Hishkim, the Bryce taught, Hishkim, a person who wakes up early in the morning, Lahavi psolis, to bring residue of the crop from the field to use for storage for fruit. Okay, so basically what happens like this: a person goes to their field, they harvest all their crops, great. There's going to be like schmutz, like stuff, I don't know, the leftover leaves and this and then all that leftover, and that is great for a couple of things, fertilizer probably, but it's also good for it's like basically use it for storing things. Keep in mind, no fridges back in the day, so they're using all raw items which are going to maintain heat, right? Or maintain, it's going to be a thermos, whatever. It's going to maintain, any temperature. They're going to use these things. So a person goes to their field to collect all the residue of their crop to use it for storage. In bishvil sheyesh alav tal, if the reason the person goes out in the morning is because it has dew on it. In other words, why are they going out early in the morning? Okay, so what's unique about early in the morning? There's two possible things. One is I go out early in the morning because it has dew on it, and when something is wet, it actually in some ways is a better. It's more dense, it's more compact, and it's going to store things much better. And so, what if I'm going out early in the morning because I wanted to have dew on it, and then I want to put my stuff in it? Then that's b'chiyutan. Then that is arihu b'chiyutan. Then it's the water over there. Even though I didn't place the dew myself, God did that, but I want it to be there. And therefore, those items now are as if I placed water on them, and now they're susceptible to tuma. Yeah? Okay?
If you're removing that, and the water from the dew goes and waters the plants, can't do that option.
No. Sorry. We're not talking about Shabbos now. In other words, these are three totally separate things which were said about the people of Tveria. This is not Shabbos anymore. In other words, these things would be muksa anyways on Shabbos probably. We're talking about just three totally separate. It happens to be the third halacha is also Shabbos related, but that's coincidence. In other words, once we mentioned Rechanan Mekavi is saying something unique about Tveria, we're going to say three things that he was lenient, or that three things that lenient rulings he said specifically about the people of Tveria. Okay, but even though they're not necessarily, no. Sorry, thank you for helping me clarify. Okay, so the person goes out on a weekday before dawn, okay, early in the morning to get the residue. So in bishvil sheyesh alav tal, if the reason the person's going out early to collect is because it has dew on it, harihi b'chiyutan, then clearly the person wants it there, and it's as if the pasuk b'chiyutan is the pasuk that speaks about susceptibility to tuma. It's intended, and now they are susceptible to tuma. If the reason a person's going early in the morning is because they are a diligent person, and they wake up early in the morning, and they get their job done, and they wake up early, so they want to get their work done. It's not because of the dew; it's just because of the person who works all day, and if they want to get this produce, they go early in the morning because it's just early in the morning, so they're not going to get in the way of their regular workflow. So eina b'chiyutan. Then it is not being the dew, although they're knowledgeable of the dew being there, we could assume then we know that it's not because of the dew, and therefore we ignore the dew, and those things are not susceptible to tumah because it's not about the dew. The reason I'm going out early is not because of the dew, and therefore we don't interpret the person's actions as giving confirmation that they want the dew there. Okay, ustam, an ordinary unstated intention. Okay, so when it comes to where 88a1 anshe Tveria, the people of Tveria, kimi shelo yibatel mimlach lo dami. If you're a person of Tveria and you don't do this explicitly for the sake of the dew, you go out early. So there, since the people of Tveria, again, Tveria was a very busy city. Okay, it's a city, you would imagine it's a city in Israel that doesn't sleep, right? So basically you'd say, there in Tveria, you would know the reason, if the person is doing because I want the dew, fine, then the dew is something the person wants. But if the person doesn't say anything, then we could just assume it's because they just want to get out early in the morning, because the people of Tveria, they were workaholics, they all worked very hard, and therefore we could assume that the reason that they're going out early is just because they just want to get out early, it's not because of the dew. Okay, so therefore he was lenient for the people of Tveria that if there's dew on the stuff, we don't make it susceptible to tumah because we don't have to assume it was done because they want the dew there, rather because they are people busy at work. Okay, halacha number 3. Okay, mistabgin ba'aluntis. You're allowed to dry yourself with a bath towel on Shabbos if you were in Tveria. What is that? Mahi. What is it referring to? The Tanya son of the Brisa. Mistabeg adam ba'aluntis manicha mechalon. Person's allowed to dry themselves with a bath towel and leave it in the bathhouse window. Okay. No. 1 second. Fine. Okay, so the person's allowed to dry themselves at the bath towel and leave it in the bathhouse window. Veloyim serena la yarin mipnei shechashinu lo davar. Person's not allowed to give it to the bathhouse attendant because they're suspected that they're going to wring out the towels. Rav Shimon Omer af mivia biyado l'socha beso. A person's allowed to bring it from their house and carry the towel home in their hand. So what is this referring to? As follows: there's a prohibition against bathing in hot water on Shabbos. Cold water technically is okay. The minhag is not to do so. There's a tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein, and Rav Shlomo Zalman has, I believe, the same ruling, and that is that if a person's very uncomfortable, if you live in Baltimore and you're in the middle of the summer and it's like beyond muggy and you feel disgusting, you'd be allowed to take a cold shower. Okay, cool. You're allowed to do that. Fine. So we're talking about a person taking a cold shower either before the minhag developed that we don't take cold baths or showers, but fine. And so a person's allowed to do so, okay? But when it comes to drying, so the Mishnah says as follows: you're allowed to dry yourself with a towel. Now, if you have a plush towel like we do nowadays and you don't have long hair, so then no problem with the towel at all, because it's never going to be really like saturated with water. Where it gets so again, if a person takes like a shower let's say on Yom Tiv, we've spoken on this before, you're allowed to go ahead and dry yourself on Yom Tiv with a towel. There's no problem, right? People have there's a have to pat dry. It's not true. Pat dry is only true when it comes to long hair and it's going to become like saturated with water. But if you are either have a very plush towel and it's not going to be a problem with long hair, which is tricky with long hair, but certainly the rest of your body, right? So it's not going to get like saturated. The regular towel is not going to get like saturated with water. It'll be dry. Whatever, it'll get a little wet, but it's not going to be saturated with water. You're allowed to dry yourself regularly, right? You all on Shabbos, you wash your hands, right? And then you dry your hands, right? No one like pat dries their hands before Hamotzi, right? So there's no difference. You're allowed to dry your body. Where it gets tricky again is their towel. Certainly, they're going to get saturated with water. So there, because of that, the Tanna Kama says, don't carry it around. You have to hang it. You don't hang it in a regular place because of what did we see earlier about wet clothing? Marasayan. There's a concern that people are going to see it and think you washed your clothing. We spoke about where is allowed, where is not allowed. So you put it in the window. You just put it in a place where people don't dry their clothing in the window. Not done. Not like just sitting in the window. Fine. Tanna Kama says that's what you do. And then the Oliyarin, you don't give it to the bathhouse attendants. They were a little bit more incentivized to keep the place all neat and clean, and therefore, you don't give it to them because we don't trust them. Rav Shimon says you're even allowed to bring them home. We're not concerned that a person's going to, by mistake, go ahead and wring the towel. But over here, you have your wet towel and you're not at home. So Rav Shimon says you're allowed to bring the towel home, even though it might be really, really wet. You're allowed to bring it home. Now, Rav Shimon over here.
Preventing the attendant from wringing.
Well, that's not his reason. His reason is because it's your towel, and you want to bring your towel home, and there's a concern. Obviously, we have an Eruv over there. Here we are talking about Shabbos. There's a concern that you're going to, you don't want to leave your towel in the mikvah. They're going to throw it out in 2 seconds, or just incorporate it theirs. So therefore, it's a case of, so to speak, necessity. Now, generally speaking, when something is really wet, we don't move it on Shabbos, right? This is why when we clean up a spill, we want to use paper ideally, because then there's no issue of schita. But if you use a towel, you really want to try to make sure the towel doesn't get soaked, because if the whole towel is soaked, handling on Shabbos is actually usher, because there's a concern I'm going to squeeze it out. This is a unique exception, and that is the case of towels which are permitted to be used on Shabbos. Okay? Fine. So let's go. And Rav Chanan Mekavia specifically allowed this for the people of Tiberia and not other people. Fine. One more halacha over here. Let's go a tiny bit further. Amar Rabba Bar Huna Loshanu Elamalos. This whole thing about drawing water from the hole when you have the 10 tefach wall is only allowed to draw water. Only allowed to draw water. Aval lishboch aser, to pour sewage through the hole in the balcony. Keep in mind, they had very, very hygienic things. So one person was pouring sewage into the canal, and the person right next to them was picking up water for drinking water. Welcome to the ancient worlds where people lived up to 22. Okay, but bottom line is this is what was done. So halachically, he says you're allowed to pour out water. You're allowed to draw water. You're not allowed to pour out water. Okay, now the reason for that is as follows. The reason is because if you pour out water, then water is. So when I'm pulling out water, that's fine. Because again, there's partitions on each side of the wall. But over here, when I'm pouring out water, what's going to happen to the water? Granted, right now it falls into my courtyard, but the water is going to go into the Carmelis. The water is going to go, even if it's a tributary, whatever it's going to be. Even if my canal has walls on both sides, when it goes into my courtyard, it's going to eventually exit my courtyard and go into the Carmelis. So it's if I'm pouring it into a Carmelis, and therefore I'm allowed to draw water out, but if I pour water out, it's going to eventually go out outside. Maskler of Shizbi asked, why is this different than a cesspool in a chatzar, where we know the halacha is that I'm allowed to pour water in, even if it's going to run off into the Rishus Harabim? So Gemara says, Hani taimi, the water is the cesspool, generally they absorb into the ground before flowing out. The cesspool basically is like an area in the ground where they poured stuff, and it was like muddy area, and it basically got absorbed. Okay, so typically it gets absorbed, and therefore even if sometimes it doesn't get absorbed, since typically it gets absorbed, it's fine. Whereas in the pouring waste into the canal, it goes into the canal and immediately into the Carmelis, therefore it's not going to be allowed. Okay, v'hani lo taimi, when you pour water in from the balcony into the canal, it doesn't get absorbed. Ikad Amri, another version, Amar Rav Huna lo tema l'malasu d'shari. Here it's the lenient view. Don't say it's only a situation where I am drawing water, lishbach aser, and say that pouring sewage out is prohibited. Lishbach lami shari. According to this view, pouring sewage is also permitted. Amar Rav Shizbi pshita hainu uka. Rav Shizbi says, hey, isn't this identical to a cesspool? Why do you have to say that? Don't I know this already? Ma'od tema, I would have thought hani taimi. I would have made the difference. I would have thought to distinguish that a cesspool, generally the waste gets caught up by the mud. V'hani lo taimi, but over here when I'm pouring water into the canal, it doesn't cease. Kamash blan. Or in this second version, Rabbi Rav Huna is being lenient that I'm allowed to pour the sewage into the water of the canal, even though I know it's going to flow out into the Carmelis. The reason is because I don't really care for it to leave the Carmelis, go into the Carmelis. All I want is to get it out of my house, right? According to this the second view, all I really care about is to get it out of my house, and therefore I don't care the fact that it's going to go in the Carmelis, and that's not my intention, and therefore I'm allowed to do so as well. Okay, and Baruch Hashem, we live in a world of modern plumbing. Have a great day.